Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. It's my first visit to Iceland, so I don't know anything about the place, and I've been around since last night, so I've seen some things and discovered that most things here I can't pronounce in the slightest, including people's names. It's very, very difficult for me. Now, I'm going to be talking today. I'm just should say a proviso at the beginning of this, that although the talk is killer robots coming soon, what can we do? I'm actually very positive about artificial intelligence and robotics, and I've been working in it for a very long time. So I see a lot of good sides, but I'm going to be talking to you about a very ugly side today, which is very important to pursue. And I'm using the term killer robots because I'm part of a campaign called Stop Killer Robots. But for me, as an academic, I prefer autonomous weapons systems, but that doesn't look so good in a campaign or in a title of something. So I just want to start off by saying, what is AI? Which is an impossible question to answer, as you can guess. But when I started out in AI, it must have been the 1970s, the definition we were going by was the science of making machines do things that would require intelligence if done by man. I would translate that now as done by humans, of course, because we're not in the 50s anymore. But that's quite a useful definition in a sense still, because it doesn't mean that the machine has to be really intelligent. People keep talking about machine intelligence. It just means that for us, it looks as if it's doing something intelligent. It would require intelligence if done by us, and it could be something just like high-speed search, like, for instance, playing chess, which is a very, very intelligent thing for humans to do, because they can only search so many moves ahead, and the limitations of our memory means that we have to use very advanced pattern recognition to be really smart. Whereas if you take the machine that beat Kasparov, Deep Blue, just searches so many moves ahead that he's got no chance whatsoever. It's like me trying to arm wrestle with one of those big diggers in the road. But nonetheless, that would be called artificial intelligence. And since those days, it's changed quite a lot because there are so many labs and so many companies doing things in AI. So it's in our fridges, it's in our phones, it's everywhere. And so the definition has kind of lost what it means now. I'm not sure what it means now at all myself. Maybe somebody here will be able to tell me, but never mind what a robot is, that's another thing entirely. What we say there is, I know a robot if I couldn't tell you what a robot is, but I know one if I see one. So let me explain what I'm going to be talking about then. So I want to talk today, and it's strange talking in a country that doesn't actually have an armed forces about weapons, but it's still very important for everybody to know about this. And it happened a few years ago, 2006. I knew nothing about military work. I'd never accepted military funding, and I've always been just a pure academic studying. And then I was at a press conference about some ethical issues in robotics, because I work in childcare, elder care with robots, the ethical issues. And a journalist asked me the question about military robotics. And so I didn't know anything, so I went to the internet to spend an evening so that I could answer questions in future. And that evening turned into 9 months with me being quite shocked about what I read. I read all of the US plans that were around at the time for all of the US forces, and all of them were talking about using autonomous robot weapons. And that really shocked me because they hadn't a clue what they were talking about. They had no idea what the limitations of the technology was. They were living in some sort of science fiction world. So it's come to this, and I'm going to explain to you I'm going to first of all explain what's being developed, what the new weapons look like. I'm going to explain what an autonomous weapon is, and then I'll go on to explain what we're doing about it. So certainly until the 20th century, and well into the 20th century, weapons were all controlled directly. So you'd have a trigger. It was mechanically controlled. So people were in direct control of the weapons. But nowadays, except something like Kalashnikov, most weapons, even rifles, have some sort of chip between them and the person pulling the trigger. There are smart rifles now, I don't know if you know about these, on sale in the United States, of course, to hunters. They cost $13,000, and all you do is, from a mile away, you can look through a telescopic lens and sort of watch the person or the target, it's supposed to be for hunters, with a bit of laser, and the rifle takes care of it. All you have to do is fire and the bullet will hit the target. So everybody can be an expert assassin now. Those are the kinds of things that are going on. But it's not that I want to talk about. So what's an autonomous weapon? Now you notice here a Viking, because the first talk I gave on using this animation was in Copenhagen, so I used a Viking for it. But you're Vikings as well, aren't you? So it's sort of appropriate. Some of you are. So an autonomous weapon is this. Once it's been activated or launched or whatever you want to call it, from then on, it's under computer control. Now this is the definition given by the US Department of Defense is simply an autonomous weapon system is one that once launched will track, select, and kill. They don't use the word kill, and what's the word they use? And target without further human supervision. Okay, so no human supervision. How many people here are robotics people? Oh, not a lot. Okay. Well, here's a short course in robotics. It's about 6 sentences. Okay, maybe 10. So in order to use a computer for weapons, what you've got to do is you've got to have information going into the computer. And to do that, you have sensors. Now, sensors can be as simple as this microphone I'm wearing. It can be a laser sensor. It can be a LiDAR sensor. It can be a radar. It can be, sonar. It can be all sorts of things. Your household alarm is quite a good sensor. The one that I don't know if you have burglar alarms here, but the normal burglar alarm, which is very, very cheap, that's a sensor that can be used. So all of those sensors send information into the computer. But the important part is not just the sensors and the quality of the sensors. They're very good nowadays. It's what happens inside the computer. What are the programs that are analyzing these sensors? And that's where the real quality is. So once the program analyzes all of the information coming in, it will send a signal to a motor to tell the motor to move or not move. Simple as that. So move the motor, don't move the motor. So signal goes out to a motor, and for instance, if you have a robot sitting here and it detects something coming at it, it could just rotate out of the way. Okay, so that's a complete course in robotics. That's pretty much all you need to know about robotics. That's what happens, apart from how to do the programming. Now, the other thing that can happen is this signal can go to a weapon, and that's where I have problems. Okay, and I'll explain why as I go along. So here's an autonomous weapon. Now, they're not being used yet. Well, that's a matter of debate as to what exactly an autonomous weapon is. But mostly the kind we're worried about are not being used yet. But that's because I can make one. Look, I could make an autonomous weapon system for you within the space of a week, maybe 2 weeks, that could come into this room and carefully kill all the humans without damaging the furniture too much. Okay. And this is how it would work. So you've got a simple program there. There's 2 sensors, and these are like household alarm, so they detect heat. And what happens is if one of those sensors detects body heat, the whole robot will rotate until both sensors detect the heat. So if heat detected in one sensor, rotate robot till both sensors detect heat, and then fire the weapon. So here we go. Heat detected in one sensor, rotate the robot, fire the weapon. Simple as that. That's an autonomous weapon. Now, big nations are not going to use that because it doesn't comply with the laws of war in the slightest, okay? You've got to be able to discriminate between different classes of people. As I said, I can discriminate between furniture and non-furniture. Now, we've got some of these weapons already, but they're mainly used for defensive systems. And when I say defensive systems, I mean things like this is the German system, and what that does is if someone fires a mortar at you, so shells are coming in, this will detect the speed and the trajectory and fire a barrage of shells at it and destroy the mortar. So it protects the soldiers from being hit by mortar fire. It's called the mantis. And that seems to be, fairly successful at doing that. They have these on board all US ships. Not this, they have something called the phalanx on board all US ships for detecting swarm attacks, so they can just switch it to automatic. But there's someone standing nearby, they call it supervised autonomy. I need to be careful about this kind of device, though, because I read small print, and if you read the small print of the manufacturer, not only does it detect the mortar, but it uses the same information to pinpoint the location for where it came from. So what I don't want is automatic firing back, because you can trigger a mortar with a remote control from the middle of a village. I'm jumping ahead of myself here. Okay, so here's some of the systems there are around now. This one is what I call a cusp system. So it's kind of what I don't like it. This is used by Israel, and I think there's a video here. You can see it. So that's called a loitering munition. And what it does essentially is it's fired like a rocket before, not usually for that use. Before Israel attacks an area, they will fire these into the air, and they'll go over the battlefield or over a large area, and they're searching. So they're called loitering munitions. They're searching everywhere, and what they're searching for is radar signals. Now, when a radar signal hits one of them, they look it up in their database to find out if it's one of their own radars or not. And if it isn't one of their own radar signatures, they turn into a dive bomber and bomb it. Now, so that's fully autonomous. They just launch it, off it goes, looks for radar signals, and then dive bombs them. Now, there's never been any reports in the years they've used of any accidents happening. But nonetheless, it's not a discriminatory weapon, because the assumption here is that the radar is connected to an anti-aircraft gun. If someone took the radar off and put it on a hospital roof, or put a radar on a hospital roof or a school roof, it couldn't discriminate. It would just destroy the school or the hospital. And when I talk to Israelis, when I go there, or when I go to talk to Israelis, they say that, but that's not their responsibility. That's the responsibility of the people who put it in the roof. And for me, it's a joint responsibility, actually. But they sell these to... They sell them to Turkey, Korea, China, and India. So there are quite a lot of them around. The United States used to use these kinds of weapons in the Vietnam War, but they've stopped using them. Okay. So what's the new thing?
Meet the X-47B, the technological dream machine that is the future of U.S. Navy unmanned aviation. The X-47B has been designed for use aboard Nimitz-class aircraft carriers. Its tailless batwing shape will make it the stealthiest unmanned system ever to take to the skies.
Now that's fast subsonic, okay? And it's been tested extensively, taking off and landing in aircraft carriers, even in windy conditions. It's got weapons bays. It's a prototype, so it hasn't actually been used yet. But the plans have all been quite clear. The idea is that because China now in the Pacific have missiles, hypersonic missiles, capable of sinking a US aircraft carrier, they need to move further back from China. These craft have 10 times the reach in fuel than an F-25 that's normally on an aircraft carrier. Also, they can be refueled in the air. That's the other thing they've tested extensively. So these are planned for use against China, who are so vastly outnumbering the United States that the language they use is having swarms of them to attack. Okay. Britain are in on the act as well. This is the British one, which is very similar, and they call that an unmanned intercontinental combat aircraft. Although they say it will never be used without a human, but they've tested it extensively in Australia, and they've tested it so that they're coordinating targets together, several of them together. Fully autonomous again. Okay. Just a few more samples. That one's Israeli, the one over on the far, the left there. That's called the Guardian, and that was sold as patrolling the borders in Israel and shooting people who are trying to get into the borders. And ever since the trouble is that once you start a campaign and it gets big, then everybody starts taking down their web pages and changing their dialogue, changing their narrative. And now they say the gun is only completely, there's a human there looking through a camera, and they also you can't find any photographs of these with guns on anymore. Okay. This one is a DARPA project. That's the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, which is the research wing of the United States. And this one is an autonomous submarine for finding and sinking other diesel engine submarines, although it could also be used for sinking ships, diesel engine ships. This one's the Crusher. I don't think there's a video of that there. It's called the Crusher because it crushes Cadillacs. It's a 7.5-ton truck that grew out of the DARPA Grant Challenge. And you can see its arm there. That's fully autonomous as well, made by Carnegie Mellon University for $80 million. This one is Chinese, the Invisible Sword Anjian, and they've been developing that for about 8 years. That's a supersonic air-to-air combat aircraft, fully autonomous as well. Russia are the only country that really have used autonomous weapons, but they're using them in Russia to guard their own installations. They have little tank-like ones that are autonomous that go around ballistic missile installations. South Korea also have got border guards on the demilitarized zone with North Korea. Lots of these things are on stalks. They've got sensors and they can fire at people coming in. At the moment, they use a camera to tell, but they can switch them to autonomous mode if too many people are coming in. Okay. So the big term that's being used now in the United States and the Department of Defense is swarm. So they've funded lots of swarm things like swarms of small gunboats that are fully autonomous that can swarm ships. Now you might think this is great because you just have robots fighting robots and humans won't be involved. And that's what some people say, especially teenagers. But the problem with that idea is that you could have that already. I mean, the United States go into Iraq or Afghanistan, bomb it to pieces, win completely. But does it end there? No, it doesn't. 10 years later, the place is totally destroyed. America has to leave defeated, essentially, and leave a complete mess behind. Robots fighting robots won't work any differently than that. And if they did, if they were going to fight robots against robots, that would be an awful waste of money. It would be better. I would rather see the leaders of the two countries stripping down to their underwear and wrestling. That would be a much better way of doing it. Okay, so let me just explain the 4 major problem areas with these, apart from the fact that they're weapons, of course, that are discussed here. They're computer controlled. Now that's a big problem. Anybody who's used Microsoft will know that. Do you know that the drones are actually controlled with Microsoft Vista? They recently paid Microsoft $30 million so that they could still maintain their stations for controlling the drones. It's unbelievable. Compliance with IHL, that's the laws of war, the Geneva Conventions, those sorts of things. It's called international humanitarian law. Ethical issues, I'm going to cover these briefly in just a moment. And then global security. Okay, those are the 4 big problem areas that we've got that are there. Now, in terms of being computers, the Department of Defense in 2012 said they produced guidelines for the use of autonomous weapons. This is the US Department of Defense. And they keep saying that they're going to do verification studies to minimize potential failures. And it isn't until you get to the very back of the document in small print they actually tell you what the potential failures are. And how you minimize them, I don't know. Human error, human-machine interaction failures, malfunctions, communication degradation, software coding, enemy cyber attacks, infiltration into the industrial supply chain, jamming, spoofing, decoys. And this one, which I very embarrassed them about, and they said they'll never mention it again, other enemy countermeasures or actions, unanticipated situations on the battlefield. Can anybody here explain to me how you minimize an unanticipated action? Okay, so those are the kinds of things that can happen with computing, as you know. I mean, you can hack into things not too difficult. Now, compliance with international humanitarian law, and there's a number of issues here. Distinguish between military and non-military persons and objects. Now, that's just not very good at the moment at all. You can't use cameras too well at the moment because there's a lot of shadows in the fog of war. Discriminating between an insurgent and a non-insurgent combatant is difficult enough for humans, but very difficult. Computer vision isn't that far ahead, but it's worse for the military. They use something called automatic target recognition, which is LiDAR, which takes distance measurements instead. And the reason why they use that is because you don't have to worry about shadows or anything. And it works really well for a tank, providing the tank is in the middle of the desert, okay, and nothing near it. So it works in uncluttered environments. You put the tank near a woodland, you can't tell the difference between the tank and a truck because there's branches sticking up. They use feature recognition. A ship in the middle of the ocean's okay, but any kind of normal warfare would be very difficult. Now, what they've done, the International Committee of the Red Cross, Chatham House in the UK, all the think tanks and the UN themselves have brought, not just taking my word for it, they've brought in a lot of robotics experts from the civil world, from industry, and from the military as well. And generally, it's been accepted now that except under certain narrow circumstances, they could not make this kind of discrimination required for the laws of war. Now, the argument is, but we will be able to in the future. So, I'd rather wait till the future before I start developing them, please, if that's going to be the case. But I can't see it happening too easily. There are circumstances such as you could replace a cruise missile, and that's what the US are thinking, with an X-47B, because a cruise missile costs $2 million. You send it to a bridge and it destroys the bridge and it's gone. You send an X-47B, that's that dream machine they talked about, it releases 2 missiles, Hellfire missiles, that cost $38,000 each, destroy the bridge, comes back, gets reloaded and used again. So under those circumstances, it could comply with the laws of war. So there's narrow circumstances like that. My worry is that if you allow narrow circumstances like we did with submarines, like we did with aerial bombardment, then it's not going to work out too well. I don't know if you know, but in 1938, President Roosevelt wrote to all of the European nations, Spain, Germany, Britain, and I've seen the letter, pleading with them not to use aerial bombing. He said, this is the most indiscriminate form of warfare. Don't use it. I plead with you. It will change warfare. 6 years later, the United States was dropping nuclear weapons on Japan. It happens that quickly if you let it get a foot in the door. Proportionality decisions under the law of war. It's unfortunate, I don't like this, but you're allowed to kill civilians, essentially, providing it's of direct, concrete military advantage. Now, nobody can specify what military advantage is. There are PhD theses written about it in military academies if you go onto the internet. We don't know what concrete military advantage is. It's a decision that a commander on the ground makes. I mean, for drone strikes in Afghanistan, it was 30, if you were going to kill more than 30 civilians, you had to ask a higher person, but that's unusual. Generally speaking, it's not something that you could quantify or put in a computer algorithm or determine the legitimacy of a target. And who can be held accountable? It certainly won't be a robot, okay? And it could be a manufacturer, a software engineer. And commanders in the field, military commanders I talk to, don't like autonomous weapons because they say, we'll be held accountable and we don't understand them. I mean, they can blow up, they can take a bullet, they could crash. There's all sorts of reasons why you could get off with war crimes simply because you're using an autonomous weapon. Okay. So there's also a moral issue that comes up quite a lot, and that is, should we really allow the decision to kill a person to be delegated to a machine? And that's quite a strong moral argument. Just General Latif from the United States military, United States Army, Bob Latif, said being killed by a machine is the ultimate human indignity. And so it's all about human dignity, and do you want people to be killed by a machine? Some people don't mind, they say hand grenade or a machine making the decision, what's the difference? But some people don't like it. Now, another kind of moral philosophy is around is that utilitarianism, okay? Utilitarianism essentially, and I'm cutting to the chase here, means that you do something that's for the best interests of the most people. So, a lynch mob or whatever. So you do something that's in the best interests of the majority of people. And so the US are saying, well, you save a lot of soldiers' lives using these machines. So that's a good utilitarian object. Other people in an odd kind of way, say that robots don't get angry, they don't seek revenge, and they won't commit rape. But they're forgetting something. They're imagining that the robots are some sort of agent. We're talking about weapons here. And the same people who are going to seek revenge, get angry, seek revenge, and use rape as a weapon of war, have a new weapon to help them do those things. So that's sort of crazy. But the idea that eventually, if we use these for long enough, they'll be more accurate than humans and save more human lives, okay, on the battlefield. That was the idea, and certainly save more soldiers' lives. Now, another philosopher, Tamburini, has said that this is what you call narrow utilitarianism, and you should really be focusing on the big picture, which is what we do, which is wide utilitarianism. In other words, not how it affects your military, not your own national interests, but how it's going to affect the planet. And so, this is the last little bit of this. We've produced a leaflet, which anybody can have, for the United Nations on 10 risks for global security. One is that we can imagine there's going to be an arms race pretty quickly as soon as this gets started. You've already seen that many nations are developing them, and there'll be quick proliferation. Now, this could lower the threshold for going into conflict. I've already seen, I'm not going to go through it, but I've already seen how drones are lowering threshold for conflict. Action short of warfare, where you're not even at war with people. You can just float in, assassinate, kill, do those kinds of things. So you end up with this idea of a continuous global battlefield. DARPA's trying to develop a 5-year battery. I mean, good luck with that, but they've got one that will last for a month now. So the idea is you go in, you destroy a place, you take it over, and then you leave these autonomous machines hovering around, surveying everything with weapons on board, so they don't let anything else happen. Now, 2 I'm going to focus on here are number 4 and 5. I won't go through all of these, but number 4 and 5 are the 2 that scare me most, really, because of all the talk I hear from military advisors. First of all, the accelerating pace of battle. I showed you the X-47B, which is fast subsonic. This one is supposed to be supersonic, but DARPA, again, the United States research, want to be able to get a team of unmanned combat aircraft anywhere on the planet within the window of 1 hour. So they've been working on this HTV-2 program, and they're still at preliminary testing, but they've tested this thing here, traveling at 20,921.5 kilometers an hour, roughly, okay? So really, really hypersonic speeds. And you couldn't get a pilot going at that speed because of the twists and turns involved. So we're talking about really fast here now. And one of the reasons that military advisors keep coming up with, very high-level ones, the lower-level ones aren't so keen, but the high-level ones keep coming up with, is that we need autonomous weapons because the pace of battle is getting so fast that there isn't time for humans to make decisions. Okay? My answer to that is always, well, slow down a bit. There's no rush to kill more people. So you're making the space of battle so fast. I don't know what to do about that. I can't have a, speed limit treaty, although we could do with one really. But things are getting faster and faster, so humans can't react in time. And that's not good without humans there. So that's one thing. So very, very high speed. The other thing is they're talking about swarms of these. And whenever you read the reports from nations, particularly the United States, and I'm picking on them because they're more open information society, so I've seen their plans and discussed with them a lot. But when you think about it, they're thinking they've lost their dominance in the missile world now. China's got ahead. Okay. So they're thinking we can get a military edge by using these autonomous weapons. And they have these simulations, they have these projections from the various think tanks, and all the ones I read, and I'm very critical of them to the people who write them, because they project the United States having all these swarms of autonomous weapons. But what they don't project is what the enemy have. They always imagine the enemy will be exactly the same as it is now, frozen in time. It's not really thinking about how they're developing the same kind of technology in a different sort of way. Now, if you have swarms of one person's autonomous robots meeting swarms of another, or any individual robot, as any computer scientist here will tell you, if you have 2 unknown programs, computer programs or algorithms, competing against each other, nobody can predict what will happen. It's impossible to predict. You cannot do it. So that cannot comply with the laws of war. You can't guarantee what will happen here. Now, rather than use all these fancy terms, I've got a simple example to give you here to explain what I mean by two programs interacting. And this is not a complex algorithm, but it'll let you see what can happen. Because if you have a combat program that tells your device how to fight, you're not going to reveal that to your enemy, or your enemy can destroy it immediately. Okay, so they're going to be unknown. So let me get into the civilian world now, and I want to talk about buying books on Amazon. Do you have Amazon here? Yeah? It's everywhere, isn't it? It's like a plague, really. So when we look at this, there's a book that's sold on Amazon generally. It's called The Making of a Fly, and it's out of print. And it gets sold for about $50 usually. That's the plus $3.99 shipping. That's its sort of standard price. Now, these two companies are Amazon sort of booksellers, Prothnath and Border Books, and they both have little algorithms for pricing their books. So Prothnath, what they do is they search all of the Amazon books, and they make their book 0.998 times the highest price. So they're not the most expensive, they're coming in a bit cheaper. Now, Border Books are a bit sneakier. If they don't have the book in stock, they still will sell it to you. But what they do is they search the whole of Amazon for books they don't have, and they make them 1.207 times the highest price. Now, what happened was these two programs got into a competition about the making of the fly, and nobody noticed for a week, so they were competing. So Prothnath would say, they make the book 0.998 times the highest price. Border Books would make it 1.207 times the highest price, which raises the price. So then Prothnath come along and make it 0.998%, and so on and so on. And by the end of the week, the book was selling for $23 million. Okay. Now that's two simple programs. You can imagine two complex algorithms competing. We just have no idea. That could have been predicted, of course. I mean, that was one that you could have predicted. Okay. So what are we doing about this? Well, I started I didn't. Four of us started the International Committee for Robot Arms Control in 2009. There were three other academics as well as myself who were writing about this. And our goal at the time was to create international discussion about it. That was all. Because nobody was talking to anybody else about it. No other nations were talking to any other nations about it. And we went out, wrote lots of newspaper articles, lots of academic journal articles and law journals, etc. And people were listening. I had talked to about 30 militaries from around the world, but there was still no international discussion. We were getting a lot of press and a lot of talk, but no discussion. And then in 2012, in February, Human Rights Watch came to visit me. Human Rights Watch is a non-governmental organization that deals with humanitarian affairs. They came to visit me in 2012 in Sheffield and had a discussion with me. And we had a couple of meetings, and then we all met together in New York, this group. And that's Human Rights Watch. Standing next to me there's Jody Williams, who got a Nobel Prize for stopping landmines. That's Pugwash, who also got a Nobel Prize. And then there's various other Landmine Action Canada. So there was a small group of 9 NGOs. At this point, we were not a non-governmental organization. And we decided at that meeting to start a campaign, and they called it Stop the Killer Robots. I tried to not call it that, but they were right. Anyway, I was outvoted by a lot. Everybody else liked it. So we decided to start a campaign, it's a political campaign. We don't go around with placards. I mean, we launched it from the UK Parliament in April 2012. Now, that changed everything. We were not now just we had a lot of very experienced people. We're now 54 NGOs, including Amnesty International, from more than 24 countries. So they're quite strong and move. So from that base, we immediately started knocking on delegations' doors. We went to New York and talked to the American delegation, to the UN, etc. And we persuaded them that we would like to take this to a committee called the CCW. Now, the CCW is a committee at the UN that's specifically charged with prohibiting certain weapons that are nasty and cause nasty injuries, like blinding lasers and fragments of munitions, etc. So we talked to them, and they said, the French were the presidents of that committee at the time, and they said they would put it to the nations. There's 121 nations in it. There were 117 at that time, 2013. So the campaign had only been going 6 months, and they put it to this assembled nations, and any one of them can veto it, but they didn't. So it was accepted for discussion, and they set up an expert meeting of four days in April of, they only meet twice a year, April of 2014. So we had a 4-day expert meeting, and they brought experts in from all over the place. I spoke at it as well, and talked to the assembled delegations of the various countries. And at this point, a number of countries wanted them banned immediately, but they were all low-tech countries like Pakistan, Cuba, Ecuador, the Holy See, which is the Vatican City, of course. So there were 5 nations who wanted what Pakistan said. I mean, at last we had countries talking to each other. And Pakistan immediately stood up when we talked about these weapons and said they hadn't heard of them, and said, "What? You're trying to find more ways of killing us?" So they were quite disturbed by it. And so it caused a lot of fuss, and so they decided to have another expert meeting in this year, 2014, 5 days this time, which they've done again. So we've now had 80 nations talking about it. We've just had the United Nations General Assembly meet in New York in the last couple of weeks, and they've been discussing it as well. But the next step for us is what you call, what we're after. Sorry, I should have told you what we were after. We're after a prohibition. So we're looking for a new treaty. Okay, so prohibition, this CCW committee I told you about, have 5 protocols, and we want this to be protocol number 6. But they're having expert meetings. So for next year, they've talked about having another expert meeting. At the General Assembly, the next step is a group of government experts. We're allowed in the room and we can say things and make statements, but a group of government experts intensifies it, talks about where to draw the line, and starts thinking about a treaty. But what they're trying to offer us for next year again is another one of these expert meetings. So it's going to turn into an annual conference. So we're putting a great deal of pressure on them. Austria and the Netherlands have stood up at the General Assembly meeting at the UN in New York just 2 weeks ago and said they want one of these groups of governmental experts. So we're putting pressure on, and we might not get it next year, but I'm damn sure we'll get it the year after. Okay. Haven't got time to get through all this other stuff. Essentially, what we're saying is that you should always have a human somewhere in the loop. So I showed you earlier robot control, using artificial intelligence. You can use artificial intelligence to make much, much better decisions. I mean, the problem with smart weapons is smart weapons kill less people, they say, but then they use them more often. So overall, they might kill more people. But the idea that they kill less people is incidental to what the intention is. The reason why you have smart weapons is to save cash on ammunition, so you hit the right target. And what I'd like to see, and this is not what the campaign's about, but myself, what I want to see is actually having the goal of making weapons that will only kill the people who are in the combatants on the other side. And I don't want to see anybody being killed, but at least that would be something, and no humans being killed, no sort of civilians being killed whatsoever, no humans if possible. And the way you could do this is using artificial intelligence, but the sensory input comes into the humans, and the humans decide on who's going to be killed. And this is complex. It's not simple. I've written papers about the kind of interface that's required for humans to have what you call deliberative human control. It takes us a few minutes to make a decision. It's not instant, but at least it ensures that the targets are legitimate. So conclusions here, if I've got some. I think that artificial intelligence autonomous robots could be useful in armed conflict, and I didn't mention their use in bomb disposal. Okay, that's a very good use. And a warning is we must be very cautious about what tasks and how much control we cede to machines. And I haven't talked to you at all, and maybe it'll come up in the panel, about how this technology is already coming back into some countries for police use. Okay, but I don't want to talk about that now. So finally, autonomous weapons can't comply with the laws of war, can't be guaranteed to comply with the laws of war, I should say. Their predictability to perform mission requirements can't be guaranteed. Their unpredictability in unanticipated makes weapons reviews extremely difficult. And I'm not going into that. There's quite a lot of detail there. But the threats to global security are unacceptably high. Okay, thank you for listening. I hope it didn't shock you too much. So I went a little over time by a couple of minutes.
So we actually have time for a couple of questions, but then he will join us for the panel afterwards. So we can have more discussions then. Are there some pressing issues at this moment or clarifications?
They don't have to be too pressing, and they can be dumb as well.
Yeah, so we'll delegate, one question.
Would you classify landmines as autonomous weapons?
That's a question that does come up, and a way to think about it is, I like to think of. I don't like to think about them at all, but when I do think about them, I think of them as victim-activated bombs. And some robotics people say it's just an autonomous robot, but it's like a landmine is like the doorbell when you press and it rings. But if you take your doorbell off and put it in the ground and you step on it, it will ring the bell. And nobody would call that a robot. You said an autonomous system.
Autonomous weapon.
No, it's not, because it's triggered by pressing. So.
There's one question back here.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you looked into, you talk a lot about like the front end where autonomous weapons systems kind of are making autonomous decisions, but in the back end, in the what's called signature strikes, for example, isn't there a lot of artificial intelligence going into selecting targets already, even though a human is pressing the button? Are these considered weapons in your definition?
I'll get that. Who was I talking? Who asked the other question? All right, because I was looking at him because I thought it was him speaking. I can't really tell. Okay, thank you. There's quite a lot of autonomy going into drone strikes, in the sense that you've got these so-called pilots with their joysticks, but they don't take the vehicles from A to B. That's just waypointed with GPS. So it goes from that point of view. But the targets are explicitly being selected by someone sitting at a big screen and looking at the target, so they can actually check the legitimacy of the target. So I don't have problems so much with that technology. And I could bore you stupid talking about why I don't think they're a good idea and the way they're being misused, particularly by the CIA. And I don't know if you've read the drone papers that have just been released. They've been hacked and they're all being released now, which is a really shocking read about how this technology is being completely misused. But we've had to struggle. I was also part of a drones campaign in UK, but we've had to struggle very hard to try and separate our campaign of autonomous weapons from the campaign against drones, because essentially that campaign is lost. There's no hope for it. It's too late. China have started selling them now. They've sold armed drones now to Iran in the last couple of months. Pakistan have their own now. I believe there are 30 countries now with armed drones. So, that ship has sailed. So we have to, and it's not good, but we have to keep our stuff separate, essentially.
Thank Noel again.
Thank you.